Welcome to the podcast, where we introduce you to incredible humans who share their journeys with the mission to inspire you to harness your own inner tenacity to drive your life and career forward. And now, your host, Adam Posner.
Welcome back to the podcast, where I bring you the best and brightest from the world of business, marketing, and personal growth to help you harness your inner tenacity and drive your career and life forward. Today, we have a special show all around diversity and inclusion in the age of the corona pandemic, specifically as we are seeing so many companies cut budgets and programs in the downturn economy. And we made such great strides in the past decade, and it's critical to continue this progress and keep it top of mind. And I'm excited, honored, and humbled to introduce my two guests, experts on the subject. They are the founder and senior consultant at OrgShakers, a human capital global consulting group. First, David Fairhurst, the gentleman joining me right now. And we have our second one right here. Let's do it. Maya, we are live. This is live TV. Awesome. Great timing there. Stay with us here. We're in the middle of the intro. And he recently founded his own consultancy called OrgShakers, which focuses on optimizing people in organizations. Until the end of last year, he was executive VP, Global Chief People Officer. That's a big title, man. At a little teeny tiny little burger shop. You might have heard of it, called McDonald's. Probably the world's largest HR role, with oversight of almost 2 million employees in over 120 countries. And he's credited as one of the key leaders in delivering the company's historic business turnaround, which saw the firm's market cap rise from 93 billion, that's B with a billion, to 147 billion in just 4 years. And you can certainly check out more on David and his impressive pedigree and resume online. He's pretty easy to find. And he's known to be disruptive and a strategic thinker, and we'll put him to the test today. And previously making predictions which have appeared in the Financial Times newspaper. And he tells me that today he has a few more to share with us. So he's going to put on his Nostradamus hat and see what's happening there. And thrilled to welcome, thank you for bearing with us on your technical difficulties, Miss Maya Bordeaux. Thank you for coming along for the ride. And prior to OrgShakers, she served as Chief Human Resource and Communications Officer at Tribune Publishing, leading all people strategies and programs, as well as internal and external communications. And her previous tenure includes leadership roles at Wilton Brands, McDonald's Corp., and North Shore University Health Systems, to name a few. I got to take a break from talking. And I had a pleasure to connect with both Maya and David last week before the show and discuss why D&I is so critical right now more than ever. And I'm excited to continue our conversation and share with everyone tuning in. Thank you for joining us. Let's jump in. Maya and David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for joining, and everyone watching and listening, thank you for joining us on this special show. So let's jump in here. As I told you guys in our pre-show, the core of the podcast is to really talk about, folks' career journeys and really inspiring. So before we get to the meat of the conversation around D&I, I'd love if you could both kind of share a very quick snippet of your career story. You're both extremely accomplished. Maya, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background.
Oh, great. Thank you, Adam, for having us. And so I am a Chicago native, born and raised on the south side of Chicago. And so with the exception of about 5 years in California, I have built an HR career here in the Chicago area. And I have had the fortune of many diverse experiences. I've been in public companies, private company, nonprofit, PE-backed companies. And so through those experiences, I have what I call a very unique perspective and being able to help companies with all of their people strategies.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. David?
Yeah, a little bit different. I grew up in the north of England, in the industrial part of England. My family were all retailers. After the war, we created retail businesses, and my mum still works in that business, and she's heading in her 70s up for her 80s. So that's really cool. And by the time I was probably about 18, 19, I'd had 3 businesses of my own. So I had a family influence of entrepreneurialism. But then I went to work for a load of brands like Heinz, Aerospace, SmithKline Beecham, which is now Glaxo, and Tesco, the retailer, and learned just about, the real interest in how to optimize the people bit in organizations. And then 15 years ago, I joined McDonald's back in the UK, and then for the last 5 years in the global role in the US, where I could see just what you could do on the people strategy at scale, as you say, 120 countries, influencing up to 2 million staff. So how you can do your stuff, but do it on a massive scale is a really valuable thing. So that's me.
That's fantastic. So fast forward to 2020, let's talk a little bit about OrgShakers. It's a people consultancy, but what does that mean? Especially the name. What is OrgShakers all about?
Well, I think it's a fun name and it makes me smile. And these are a set of people. We've all worked together before, and you can tell we get on. There's no silos between us. We enjoy working with each other. And they're all proven people, problem solvers, if you like. They've all worked around the world in different brands and at times together. They're all not afraid of being disruptive. They're all not afraid of finding the right solution for organizations. They're all in the sort of people space, people, insight, strategy, that sort of thing. And as I say, a great set of people. I couldn't wish for a stronger team to set up this consultancy with and to, find the clients to provide some great value to. So fabulous team, very excited. And shaking's what we're about, moving and shaking.
Organ and moving and shaking. We love it. So let's jump in here. And it's important before we talk about the present that we kind of go back to the past here. And in our pre-chat, you talked a little bit about 2014 and this focus on this conversation around the youth problem and getting to 0% unemployment. Let's rewind a little bit. And I'd love if you could share some context and what that means in today's setting and how that kind of frames up our conversation.
Yeah, I think 2014 was a really important year because it was a time when youth unemployment was rife. The headlines, we forget, but the headlines everywhere were youth unemployment, youth crime, youth disaffection, all this sort of stuff. And I got access to a lot of data at the time, initially at a European level and then globally around birth rates and death rates and so on, and came to the realization that the world was going to run out of people. The supply of labor was going to be outstripped by the demand, and the employers were going to find it increasingly hard to employ people. And that felt very counterintuitive at the time. It was in the Financial Times. I called it the workforce cliff. People thought I was crazy, but that was a prediction. We're going to run out of people. And what happened was, it was correct that over time, by month, by year, we could see where it was happening. Germany was first, then Holland, UK about now, US about a year away from now. Around the world, it was getting tighter and tighter to find people to employ, and employers were finding it harder and harder. The good news is that a result of that is that employers started to focus on making sure that those who perhaps could work in the workforce, but who were perhaps underrepresented, that they were starting to do a really good and creative job at getting those people back into the workplace. And I'm talking about like women who'd had babies that didn't return, older workers, people with disabilities that needed some support. Certain ethnic minority groups continued to grow in size as well. So employers have done a really good job over the last 5 or 6 years of bringing those people back into the workplace because they needed to. The issue now, of course, that I'm worried about is that given that unemployment is likely to increase in the short term, is employers' behavior could change and we could start to see a drop in some of that focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the term is called remarginalization, right? That true focus on disabilities, minorities, working moms. We made so much progress here. Maya, I'd love if you could jump in and just talk about, all of that progress that you've seen, being on the front lines from 2014 up till March 2020, and then we'll jump into what's happening today.
Yeah, sure. So companies have invested all over the world in various diversity and inclusion efforts in an effort to diversify the workplace, to build an inclusive environment, to diversify the workforce so that we are at a point, as we were in 2020, there were, for the first time in at least US history, that there were 5 generations of workers in the workplace. And so what we really need to focus on now as a result of the pandemic is how this pandemic has impacted these diverse groups of people. With so many different people in the workplace, everybody's experience is going to be different. And companies have to be cautious about blanket approaches and generalizations and making business decisions without looking through a diversity lens.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's tough too. I mean, we're making some generalizations here during this conversation. I mean, we're talking about large global conglomerates like McDonald's all the way down to smaller mom and pop operations. And there's tough decisions to be made. And I think that's important to frame up the conversation, right? There's budgets, there's profits, there's losses, and ultimately there's people at this. So let's talk about D&I. And it's a topic that we've heard a lot about. And there seems to be some differing opinions as to what will happen to these investments in progress as a result of COVID. David, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, well, first of all, I was listening to the BBC News a week or so ago, and the Bank of England was saying that let's be clear about what's happening during this downturn is they call it like V-shaped. Is yes, you're going to get a lot of unemployment, you're going to get the economy falling off, but you're actually going to get it bouncing back very steeply. And so, my prediction, you were looking for some predictions that I'm sharing with you.
Predictions.
Here is one, is that the workforce cliff will come back. It's an issue. It's a trap that's waiting to be had again, but it's 3 to 5 years away. So as a result, let's make sure we learn the lessons of 2014 and not get ourselves into a mess again by not investing in some of these aspects and some of these talent-rich streams of labor. So that's the first thing, is it's coming back. It's around the corner. Do not get trapped by not investing. And I think that's an important aspect, is that whether you're a big business or a small business, it feels like we're in a good position as employer right now. You've got plenty of people to choose from. Unemployment's going up. People might be keen to be employed again, etc. But it's just around the corner. And the other thing you've got to remember is that people will judge you. Your existing employees, no matter whether you're big or small, will judge you on how you behave during difficult times.
100%.
And if you're switching off your apprenticeship schemes, and if you're stopping to invest in long-term unemployed youth, or not supporting older workers that are really having a tough time right now, and I'm over 50, so I can tell you.
No.
Yeah, I know, it's hard to believe.
Look at that hair. I feel like I could get my hair up like that. I should have spiked it up a little bit.
Yeah, that's the one thing I'm not short of, is hair. But but I tell you, these groups need support right now, and it's not just those groups that are going to be watching what good employers do, big or small. It's going to be the rest of your employee base. They're going to be judging you very heavily on how you continue 100%. Or not in terms of this sort of investment.
So let's pull back the curtain a little bit. I mean, you've been privy to some high-level corporate conversations too. I mean, what is that thought process within an organization when deciding what to cut, right? So a company's forecasting, they said, listen, we're looking 6, 12, 9, 18 months down the road. We're looking at the economy, and unfortunately, we have to make some cuts here. How do you balance, cutting people versus cutting programs and finding that middle ground? I mean, this has to be an incredibly difficult conversation for leaders.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is that we are starting to see evidence that they are cutting, by the way. So I was talking to the great body called International Youth Foundation. They're a global body that support long-term unemployed young people. And they're hearing a lot of clients sort of putting things on pause or cancelling things. But let's just say pause might be, a term that many companies are using. But the other thing is that Stephen Frost, who was the London Olympic diversity guy, he's big in the diversity inclusion space. He's produced some evidence to show that clients are starting to de-invest in diversity. So there is definitely an evidence that people are choosing not to, certainly at the moment, either defer or stop some diversity work. But I get it. I'm a pragmatist,
right.
And I get that organizations are going to have to make some real choices about spend right now with reduced revenues and all the costs of the workplace that they're having to put in with this sort of accommodation because of COVID. I get it. But not the first thing I would say is not everything that we're talking about in D&I costs a lot of money. It can be about focusing your existing resources, making sure your recruiters continue to focus on diversity, making sure that your trainers continue to focus on inclusivity training, etc. So that's the first thing. It's not just about budgets, it's about focus. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that some of these aspects of investment in diversity have fabulous returns. So long term, and even midterm. And my plea to some of my profession and people in businesses, make sure you're looking at the ROI of some of these diversity efforts, because some of it continues to hold up strong economically, and it's an important thing. And you've got to remember that this V-shape, this cliff, this trap where you're going to struggle to employ people is 3 years away. So if you stop now, switching it off and switching it on, can cause you issues as well.
Absolutely. Maya, do you think a lot of companies were quick on the... I'm sorry, you want to add to that?
No, I was just going to add that I agree with everything David has said. And what is important is when you're assessing what you are currently doing with regards to D&I, there is evidence that there are companies that are shifting their resources in different ways. And what I am seeing recently, I would say just in the last week or two, is companies shifting their resources with a focus on mental health. And so I wanted to step back for a minute to just talk about that, because I read an article in the Harvard Business Review recently, and it's something that was in that article that jumped out at me that sounds very simple, but is really, really profound. And it said, we aren't all in the same boat when you think about this pandemic.
100%.
And what that means, I think a silver lining in this whole experience has been the unification across the country, across the world, that people have really promoted togetherness and that we're all in this together. But when you think of this metaphorically, it's really that we're all in the same storm, but in very, very different boats.
Absolutely.
And when you think about these different boats, these different groups of people who have been adversely impacted or disproportionately impacted, it is people of color. It is our Black and Brown communities. It is people over 60. It is women. When I was at Tribune back in March, I was writing a piece for internal publication around D&I and the impact that COVID was having on diverse groups or, marginalized groups. And I went to the U.S. Department of Labor statistics to look at the demographics of our essential workers, as an example. 78% of healthcare workers are women. 60% of the labor force in the US are Black and Brown people. And so it was in early March that I was looking at those statistics, and it was amazing to watch this play out, how these communities have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And so what many doctors are saying now is that a mental health crisis is developing in these communities because of this disproportionate impact. Personally, I have a friend who lost her mother and her father 5 days apart.
Unbelievable.
African-American woman who lost her mother and her father. And so the needs of employees are very, very different now. And what companies have to do when they're thinking about their resources, their employee assistance program, their benefits plans, you have to look at it through a diversity lens. You have to look through a lens of everybody is going to need something different, and there are going to be different levels of care that are needed, and why it is so important that employee well-being is a
100%.
central focus of your return to work strategy.
Absolutely right. And it's that balance for leaders to be optimistic, pragmatic, rational, and empathetic. And that's tough. And it's tough for a lot of leaders to be all of those in ones too. So I think, I might get some slack for this one, but I think we have to give our leaders too a little bit of leeway and understanding too, because they're humans, they're going through things on their own too. And this is all uncharted for everybody. There's no playbook for this. Yeah. Right. I mean, you could go back to 9/11, you could go back to some other things in modern times too, but this is completely different. 9/11, we were physically able to open up stores the next day, right? I mean, in businesses, right? If you kind of want to think of it a little bit like that, but this is very different. So let's shift over to talking about the returning workforce. This is a part of our pre-call that really kind of stuck with me because there's a lot of things here talking about the word vulnerability, massive amounts of vulnerability. David, if you could dig into that a little bit, what that means.
Yeah, I mean, we keep hearing this terminology around normal, returning to normalization or the new norm. And I would caution line managers and leaders to not think about it that way, because the tendency of thinking about normal is to get everything back to how it was or to calm things down or, and it's not a new normal. It's an entirely new workforce with an entirely new relationship, with an entirely new outlook. And not only that, but people are going to feel anxious. And let me explain why. And it's worth stepping back to think about the degree of this, is that whenever you've been outside of work or when you've seen people outside of work in the past, as an example, McDonald's were famous for creating sabbaticals years ago. I see people go on sabbatical before they go on it, and they take, a few months out of work. They get anxious about going on it. They try to get everything ready. They go on sabbatical. They worry about what's going on back on at work. They're coming back from sabbatical. They worry about coming back. You think about women who've been out of the workplace for 15 years, bringing up children. Companies were smart enough years ago, like Goldman Sachs and Sarah Lee, to create the return ships to specifically help them reintegrate. Or even at another level, think about going back to your school reunion. If you were walking back into the room of your school pals that you hadn't seen for years, you would feel vulnerable walking into that room, right?
That's a good example.
And so it's just when people are vulnerable, their brains have been shaken, if you like, and they're not in a state. People look to do everything becomes accentuated. So it's like the sort of molehill into mountain thing. If you do something really good to somebody who's vulnerable, then it feels like $1 million. If you do something, a little thing that's not very good when they're vulnerable, it feels like a mountain. People are looking to be hurt or helped in periods of vulnerability.
What does that mean?
Basically, this is the point about loyalty, right? This is when people are vulnerable, they are most impacted around building or destroying loyalty. So as a customer, think of it that way for a minute, and then we'll talk about employees. If you've had some really bad service, something really bad's happened to you, and then somebody comes along who's serving you and just says a little thing like, I'm really sorry, this should never happen to you, let me deal with it. It's, brilliant, unbelievable, you tell all your friends. If somebody gives you really bad service and then they say the little thing that sparks you, you'll never shop there again forever. People's loyalty is massively affected when they're feeling vulnerable. Employees are no different than that. So there is a loyalty dividend to be had by thinking about the vulnerability of employees with all the groups and all the issues that Maya's just talked about there, and they are different in different boats. If you can master that, then this is a period of time as a supplier, as a leader, as an employee, as an employer, where you can actually drum up a lot of by thinking about the vulnerable state of this workforce and how you can bring them back in, the returnment, as we would call it, returning workforce.
Yes.
A lot of my colleagues or ex-colleagues, I have the benefit, right? And so hopefully I'm being helpful here, and Maya and my colleagues is, I'm not sitting in that job that I was in McDonald's, or else that job's going to be, there's going to be clipboards of testing and checks and all sorts of things they're going to have to deal with. I have the benefit of being able to sit back a little bit and think what would be helpful to my HR colleagues to think about. And I think thinking about this as a vulnerability strategy, as opposed to a series of things that you've got to check off, I think is a wise point to start. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's reframing. And both of you, we talked about the reassurance, the re-onboarding, the re-engaging, and the re-recruiting. The rule book has changed. Everything's changed. And there's such there's a microscope on everything that companies do. And when we talk about them, if we want to peel back the curtain a little bit on recruiting, right? We talk about what that looks like, trying to bring back a returning workforce, trying to reach out to people that have been laid off. And the real problem, if we want to, kind of zoom out a little bit, there's going to be a lot less open positions for a much larger market group. And what's going to happen is all those A players that were let go, furloughed, are going to be scooped up first. And rightfully so, that's what happens. The cream of the crop, that gets taken. But what's going to happen to those B and C players, right? Those people that, were laid off too. It's going to be incredibly more difficult for them. I mean, there's so many elements here. Maya, what are your thoughts?
So great question. I think that this is a time where now you are rethinking, what do you actually want to do, improving your skill set, going back to school, getting certifications. These are the things that we're seeing many employees and many people across the world doing at a time where unemployment, is at an all-time high. And so being able to improve your skill set and your marketability is really critical. Absolutely. In such a highly competitive market. And when you asked earlier about, from a recruitment standpoint, not only those, C and D players, but how do you retain the A and B players? How do you re-recruit them? Mm-hmm. And so re-recruitment is a part of this larger retirement strategy that David and I and other members of OrgShaker have been talking about. Those pillars that you mentioned earlier, Adam: reassurance, re-onboarding, re-engaging, and re-recruitment. And so if I can have a moment to talk a little bit about each of those.
The stage is yours, Maya, please.
So they're so important to successfully returning employees to work, as well as keeping them engaged and retaining your talent. And so when we talk about reassurance, that is the focus on the person, on the well-being of those employees. And never before in our lifetimes, in our careers, has that been more critically important than focusing on the well-being of employees. Not only engaging them from the standpoint of, you want to drive performance, but you have to make sure that you have a healthy workforce. So you are checking in and laser focused on their physical, psychological, emotional well-being, because a broken population of employees will be a disengaged workforce. And so that's why you have to create programs. You have to focus on the well-being with regards to mental health, with regards to de-stressors, with regards to promoting self-care and allowing employees time off so that they can take care of themselves and their families. And I think that has just been something that we have never focused on as a business, because, you know, we are cracking the whip and trying to make sure that we are as productive as possible and have these high performing teams, but you cannot pour from an empty cup. And so it's so important that you are making sure that you're taking care of your employees and checking in about them personally, not just their work and, you know, where are you on this project, but how are you doing? How are you feeling? How are the kids? How are your parents?
Everyone's going through it differently. Everybody has a unique experience, and employers have to be, you know, open to that. And let's just say hypothetically, you know, if when things start to open up and office space opens and companies are creating a safety zone, but how do you, as a leader, as a people leader, respond when someone says, I am not comfortable yet returning to the office? Those conversations are going to be happening sooner than later.
Absolutely. And that is very, very real. And so there has to be this flexibility and open-mindedness and empathy, as you said earlier, Adam, that there is absolutely going to be a portion of the population that is afraid to return to work. Mm-hmm. Conversely, there'll be those who are racing to get back to work. I mean, I talk to women leaders regularly who are like dying to get back into the workplace because it's incredibly stressful right now to be working from home in this, you know, very unique set of circumstances where also your spouse or significant other is at home, the kids are at home.
Not everyone has a good physical environment to work.
Absolutely. I was talking to somebody last week who said, can we reschedule because construction is going on right outside of my window and we couldn't hear each other. And so it's
not going to work.
Right. So it's like all of these different circumstances that occur when you are physically in your home that we just didn't have to deal with before. And so you have to be open-minded. You have to be flexible. And as we are, you know, continuing to say, everybody is different. Everybody's in a different boat. And so you cannot have this blanket approach to how you return people to work.
100%. I want to throw a quick curveball at you, David, if you don't mind. Let's say, you know, you're in this hiring position for an executive leader and you have two candidates in front of you. I'm stripping away the sex right here. We have two candidates. One of them is a single person, right? They live in the city. They have lots of flexibility. The other person is a parent with 3 kids that are being homeschooled right now. Both have equal resumes. How do you remove the bias from hiring with that thought in your head that this person who's single might have more flexibility, less interference? How do us as leaders and hiring managers remove the COVID bias?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, because the first step in any bias is to, one, be aware that bias exists, because it exists in all of us. And secondly, this is so fresh, this whole COVID thing, you know, that we are likely to see things, not even just biases, we like to see rage. We like to see age rage. You know, Those over 50 are going to start saying, why am I not being hired? I'm hearing stories of employers avoiding those over a certain age in case they die of this pandemic or maybe the next one. So that's going to cause a lot of anger. I mean, that's how overt this is. But to your point is, I think this is a conversation, and I would hope that you would have processes that ensure that you are conscious of those sorts of biases, and that you factor that into your thinking so that you make sure you're not selecting on that basis. But the other thing I would say onto this reassurance point that you were talking about here is, I think there's been examples of how you can reassure potential candidates that you're just talking about here, recruits, or even or existing employers that are returning. And I'll give you a simple example, and there are probably many others when you think of it, is we used to have issues with young people coming in for their first job into the workplace years ago, into McDonald's, the biggest employer of young people privately in the world. And they would, a lot would come in, they would do something silly, like they'd wear the wrong heels or makeup or do something that you're not allowed to do in a kitchen or whatever. They'd feel a bit silly in front of people, they'll not be familiar with it, and then they'd leave because they felt silly. But very simply by videoing and sending them information about the workplace and the restaurant before they actually came on day one, had a massive reduction in turnover. And why? Because it was a way of building confidence about the sights, the sounds, the terminology, what to expect. I'm seeing technology being played in this space. There's a product called Onboarder, which is an Australian product, which is used for onboarding staff into an organization by giving them certain things via technology, texting to your line manager before you turn up. I'm seeing that sort of product being pivoted to be used to help people come back and to provide this reassurance that we're talking about here. So I think, given that you're coming back to a workplace that's physically going to look different, like what does my desk look like? Do I have to get checked in and checked out? Is there plastic screens? I think certainly if you were doing that to certain pockets of more vulnerable parts of your workforce, video in the office on your phone and showing them what it looks like may well help reassure people. So I think there's little things, if we sit back and think about it, they're all human beings. What could we do to make somebody feel a little bit more confident, a little bit less worried, and be under no illusion? This is a different world they're coming back to. Right. So, I just think there's little things we could think about maybe.
Yeah,
absolutely. And Adam, when you asked earlier about the bias between the two candidates, I think that really highlights that this is an important time where companies should be reassessing their D&I education and what's available both online and in person for their employees. Every employer should have some type of educational material on unconscious bias, because people aren't aware that they have these biases. As David said, the first step is being aware that you even have this bias. And so I think it's an important time in our lives and in our careers where unconscious bias has to be tackled, so that you aren't making decisions with these biases and discriminating amongst different groups of people, right, particularly groups of people who are already marginalized.
The other thing I would say that's as well, Adam, is that some of these biases that existed in line managers before, I think may well have changed. Mm. And let me give you an example of that. Is flexible working, right? Working from home. You see a certain cadre of line managers that say, you can't do it, it doesn't work, I don't believe in it. We've all seen those, right? You see others that are more open to it.
4 months ago, yeah.
Yeah, and let me tell you, in my experience, the reason why most of those line managers were nervous about their employees working from home was actually not because they didn't trust their employees. It's because they didn't trust themselves.
It's control.
It's because they'd never actually gone through flexible working themselves, or had the belief that they could get up, work from home on their own. Now they've been forced to do some of these things. It may well, positively, we may well find that some line managers and their biases may have changed for the good. And and maybe that's a positive. I'm not saying all, but certainly we might see some of that. And certainly an attitude towards flexible working is an obvious thing to think about.
Yeah, no, 100%. So let's talk about leadership, right? I mean, there's been plenty shared about great leadership examples. We've seen them shine. We've also seen the failures, right? I mean, it just happens through the course, right? But what are these attributes do you think that we should be looking at leaders going forward in post-pandemic? What types of people, what types of leaders, what are those attributes that are really going to shine?
So I think the first thing that comes to mind, and that I've talked to so many of my colleagues about, is resiliency and your ability to lead through what we're referring to as the recovery period post-pandemic. And I think we are going to be faced with so many challenges, both in the workplace and in life post-pandemic, that some people are nervous and unnerved at the thought that, oh my God, this period during the pandemic was so stressful. I can't even imagine that post-pandemic, once we get on the other side of this, that it'll be even more difficult. But as I mentioned earlier about the different personal issues that will come into the workplace, it will influence the way we work, the way we interact, and how people can engage and how productive they will be. And so being flexible, adaptable, resilient, and probably most important, empathetic. Empathic leadership, I think, it has never been more important than this time in our lifetime. And compassion. So not only being able to connect and understand and empathize about what other people are going through, but being able to speak to them compassionately, make decisions compassionately. And obviously, we are running businesses. You have to make tough decisions. There will be, decisions that impact people adversely. And that is unavoidable for many, many, many companies. As we see these companies that are furloughing and lay off and filing bankruptcy, obviously there will be adverse impact, but it's all in delivery. It's all in how you
tone, messaging, transparency,
how you deliver that message, that you explain the why, and you do it with compassion and with calm.
Right. I mean, we saw Airbnb, and in my opinion, do it really well. You had the CEO really discuss why those decisions were hard, how they came to those decisions, and then what they did from a process standpoint, right? How they reached out to everybody individually, had those conversations, and really did their best to set everyone up for success. I mean, little things like keep your laptop, little things like that. We know how hard the job search is. You maybe not like a little thing like that. You've already invested into it.
Absolutely.
It's a sunk cost, right? Little things like that, instead of taking back the lap. Use that lap. Like those are the little things that matter, right, David?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm seeing some horrific examples of where that's not happening as well. So I've had lots of conversations over the last few weeks about performance management, actually, and which is a very important process. No matter what we think about annual appraisal and performance management, it is the number one correlated process to employee engagement. So that's a long-winded way of saying keeping your employees happy. There's no bigger a process than how you performance manage. I'm hearing a lot of stories about this sort of move towards technology, where some of these sort of old-fashioned, let me call them, leaders are thinking, you know what, this is an opportunity now. If they're going to work from home, I want to see when they're logged into their PCs. I want to see how productive they've been. I want technology that can big brother them. Like it's like going back to the 70s or 80s where people used to clock into a clocking machine, and we dock them to that lack of that old-fashioned trust, that old way of working. This is not the time to go backwards and do all of that. This is the time to use the technology, but in order to have a more ongoing conversation. So I do worry that not all leadership are good examples. And, I'm British, so I'm going to give you a tea bag example. I love the phrase, stupid is that leadership is like a tea bag. You only know how good it is when it's in hot water. So we've just seen leadership in hot. I think that's quite good.
I like it. I'm going to use that.
It works well in Britain. If you ever in Britain, it works well there for your listeners from over there. So, but let me tell you that we've seen good and bad. We've seen the education sector, and I've been on calls about universities where the lecturers, the professors that for years have been teaching or whatever, they're now on technology with people can see their lectures, and some of the hierarchy of the universities are not always best pleased. Like some of these lecturers that are maybe more junior or unknown were brilliant at learning and students. Others were way out of date and oh my goodness, is that the quality of what we provide? So what we're going to see through all of this and through technology as well is we're going to see leadership good and bad. So let's hope that we see what's good. And we're also going to see some talent implications here. Like, what do we need in our organizations that we found out that we were lacking? Some of these leaders. And what was really good, like you talked about Airbnb there with little examples. What did the good leaders do? And what do we need to make sure that we continue? To build on what Maya said, if I was focusing in the organization, I'd focus on one simple thing right now. EQ, emotional intelligence of your frontline managers. And by doing that, training them, recruiting for them, number one thing, because there are lots of band-aids of things around well-being. You can mental health, and we've talked about lots of different things that you can support employees with. But there's nothing more important than having a supportive line manager that you feel that cares, that you can ask questions to, that is open, because all sorts of issues are going to come out. Number one focus for me in leadership right now, emotional intelligence. And to your other point earlier, if I was recruiting for people, leadership right now, we hear lots of things, different ways of calling good leadership, ambidextrous leadership or whatever. I call it very simply and leadership, AND, and leadership. We need leaders who can deal with today and can figure out where we're going for the future. We need leaders who can deal with a country or a function or a market and can deal with the enterprise. We need leaders who can deal with execution and can innovate at the same time. So we need these sort of multiple, flexible leadership that they can deal with both hands. That's what I would recruit for. But number one thing right now, EQ.
I absolutely love it. I absolutely love it. So let's bring it home here. And thank you so much, both of you, for this incredible, deep, insightful conversation. And, for me, I used to read a lot of books when I was younger, before kids and before this thing called Netflix came around. So for me, this show is really my masterclass. It's my MBA. And I am grateful and humbled to have both of you here from a learning perspective. And as I continue learning, there's some questions that I'd love to ask all my guests and really get your perspective. And I'll start with you, Maya. What is the single greatest piece of advice you ever received that you take action on every single day? Ooh. David, you're getting it too, so you have a minute to think about it.
So unfair. So, okay.
Ladies first. Gentlemen.
So I would say be authentic and be comfortable in your own skin. And so I am naturally a very genuine and authentic person. And it is very, very difficult for many people to be comfortable and bring their entire self to work. And I think I have learned through experience the hard way. When you are not authentic, when you are not genuine, when you are not being yourself, it affects your credibility. It affects your ability to connect with people, and you're not being true to yourself. And so, it is important to be authentic, to be genuine, to speak your mind, even when it is an unpopular point of view, because all of us have a voice, all of us are important. And I encourage every person to bring your entire self to work. And if you can't do that, you're working in the wrong place.
I love it. David?
Yeah, for me, it goes back to where a lot of my advice came from, which was my granddad back in the 1940s when he set up the retail business, family business. And he did all sorts of little things at the time, some of which I thought were peculiar, but he used to get involved in, supporting people who were getting married, his staff that they couldn't afford wedding dresses. He used to support the police in all sorts of ways. I never really got some of the logic until he told me that if you look after your staff, they'll look after your customers. And, he looked after his people really well. And it's the same for organizations. It's the same for me in my job. I'm in that profession, but it's beyond me, is that if organizations can do what's right for people right now, and particularly when in a troubled time like this, then the loyalty dividend that you're going to get back from those employees is going to pay off massively with your customers. So that was my granddad's teaching.
100%. And I really want all of my shows that I've been doing in the last few months, and all my shows in general, to really end on a positive note. So a couple things here. We talk about silver linings. We talk about all these good things that have happened in the last 8 to 10 weeks. Maya, I'd love if you could share a real quick personal silver lining and a professional silver lining.
Great question. So professional silver lining, I have been able to band together with just wide range of people from different backgrounds, from different industries. I have had colleagues reach out from literally all over the world because, as you said earlier, Adam, nobody has ever experienced anything like this. And so this spirit of togetherness and trying to help each other out and support each other to try to figure out what is the right thing to do, what is the right decision to make. This has been a very powerful experience with regards to unification. As far as personally, I have learned that I am actually more patient than I ever thought I was. And some of that might be attributed to the amount of red wine consumption I've been doing during the pandemic. But nevertheless, we have been challenged in a way that we have not ever before with regards to patience, waiting out this shelter in place and being locked in. being locked in with, our significant others and our children, and not being able, to do what we want to do. And then still being forced to stay in your business mindset 8-10 hours a day. You have to stay focused and be a productive employee. And so that requires an incredible amount of patience and focus that I didn't realize that I had. So I'm pretty proud that I have been able to patiently live through this pandemic, and that probably has a lot to do with my safety and health of both me and my family. And so for that, I have an incredible amount of gratitude.
I love it. David?
Yeah, well, professionally, I've spent a lot of time, having come out of fresh from practice in the HR community to being in this space. I've had a lot of time to be doing a lot of thinking and reading around, we've talked about some of it today, that returnment strategy, the remarginalization. So I feel like I've been adding some value professionally by being able to be slightly out of the front line and to add some thinking to it and to set up OrgShakers as a result. So I feel really good about that, and I've been doing quite a bit of writing as well, which some of which is yet to come out. So excited about that, and professionally giving that time to think. It also reminds me actually that we've really got to make a conscious effort when we do get back into the mainstream of our daily lives to create that time that we've carved out when we've been working from home to actually think and take time to think and reflect, which I think is good. On the personal level, it's just given me a whole level of access to children's cartoons and Peppa Pig that I've never really seen before.
Peppa?
And I can tell you, Peppa Pig, yeah. I
have a 2-year-old and an 8-year-old. I've been through Peppa. I'm in Peppa phase.
Yeah, Peppa phase. And what's nice for Peppa for me, sitting here in Chicago, of course, is I hear that little British accent coming through. My kids that sound very American, but it gives them a little bit of Britishness, so it sounds like their dad. So I think I've been reconnecting with my little ones' kids in a way that's been nice as well, and spending time that you wouldn't normally get. So I think that's been special.
Yeah, I love it. And last but not least, and this is a question that I ask every single guest on the show, because for me, there's a power that pulls me, there's a power that moves me for everything I do, and that is my North Star. And my North Star are my 2 kids and my wife. So I'll ask you, Maya, first. Bad days, rough days, when you need something to pull you up, good days when you want to show gratitude and you're thankful. What is your North Star, Maya?
Probably my mom. My mom has really influenced who I am, how I think, how I live, how I love. She's an amazing woman and has truly lived life fully, and I am incredibly inspired by that. And so whenever I'm down, whenever I have a question, whenever I need some inspiration or some encouragement, my mom is there for me, and she knows everything. I have a mug that says, "I don't need Google because I have my mother."
Love it. That's fantastic. And David, what's your North Star, my man?
Well, I think it sounds a bit more generic, but I think that I never underestimate the power of people and how the impossible can be made possible through the efforts of people, and particularly people in organizations. So I never cease to be amazed by what people can really achieve, and particularly in a difficult time. And we see great examples around the world and the efforts of those carers and all sorts of things. So for me, that's my North Star, is seeing people do what seemingly is impossible, and it gives you an inspiration to really carry on, not just in business, but particularly in my profession.
I love it. David, Maya, I want to thank you both first for your time, your insights, your wisdom. This has been a tremendous conversation, and I really hope that everyone who's been watching live, everyone's going to be watching on the replays, everyone's going to be listening to the podcast when it comes out, gets a ton of value and insight from it. Where could folks find you? Where could they connect with you? Where could they learn more?
Yeah, well, we've got a great website. Well, we think it's great anyway. It's www.orgshakers.com. So you can find us and talk to us there.
David, Maya, thank you so much for joining me. Everyone watching, listening on the replays now, forevermore, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time and your energy. It means a lot to me for tuning in. And everyone, listen, there's more live podcasts to come. I'm back on Thursday with Sean Anderson. We're going to talk about recruitment marketing, and we'll have also Andy Foote after to talk about the good old LinkedIn algorithm. Everyone listening, thank you for joining us on the podcast. Please follow us on all the social media channels. Check out www.thepodcast.com for more. Remember, be kind to each other, take care of one another, and wash your hands. Be good. And thank you for joining us on the podcast. Catch us next week for another great episode. Take care, everybody.
Wisdom is forever, but for us, it's time to go. Thank you for joining us. Luckily, we'll be back with our next episode soon, jam-packed with more incredible humans. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing. To join the conversation, search the podcast on LinkedIn. And to catch up on past episodes and more info, please visit www.thepodcast.com.